Welcome to Knowledge for the Soul. It's the podcast where we dive deep into the different topics of health and we connect them to the physical, psychological, and spiritual aspects of life. The goal of this podcast is to provide you with the knowledge to do your best. You owe it to yourself. I'm your host, Aaron Harris, and today we're tackling another important topic, and that is internal nervous system regulation. And we're going to continue to move through this topic in a way that provides better understanding. Okay? So I want to start off by talking about what is our nervous system and how do we define it, right? So the nervous system is a complex network of specialized cells, tissues, and organs, and they coordinate and regulate the body's responses to internal and external stimuli. Okay, they act as the primary communication and control system, and they enable functions like sensation, movement, thought, and homeostasis. And you can divide the nervous system into two different parts. You have your central nervous system, which consists of the brain, the spinal cord, and that's where the brain is processing information, making decisions, storing memories, while the spinal cord, of course, relays those signals to the rest of the body. Now, the peripheral nervous system includes all the nerves outside of the central nervous system, which connect the central nervous system to the limbs, organs, and sensory receptors. It is further subdivided into the somatic nervous system, which includes voluntary movement, sensory input, and the autonomic nervous system, which involves functions like the heart rate and our digestion. So at its core, the nervous system is powered by electric impulses and neurons that transmit those electric impulses, and also chemical signals that occur between synapses between the different cells, which allow rapid communication across the body. Now, how does the nervous system connect to how we think? Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Thinking, or cognition, is fundamentally a product of the nervous system's activity, particularly the brain. When we think, whether solving a problem, recalling a memory, or imagining a scenario, billions of neurons fire in a coordinated pattern. These patterns create neural circuits that process information from sensory inputs. They integrate it with the stored knowledge and generate outputs like decisions or ideas. For instance, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain in the central nervous system, handles executive functioning such as planning, reasoning, while the hippocampus aids in forming and retrieving memories. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin modulate these processes, influencing mood, focus, and creativity. Essentially, every thought is an electrochemical event in the nervous system, and the sensory data enters via the peripheral nervous system and gets interpreted in the central nervous system, and it results in conscious awareness or action. Disruptions like in neurological disorders like Alzheimer's, for example, highlight this link by impairing thought processing through damaged neural pathways. Now, let's connect what is related between changing habits and the nervous system, right? Habits are essentially automated behaviors wired into the nervous system through repeated actions, forming strong neural pathways in the brain. Okay, so there's this region in the brain called the basal ganglia, which plays a central role in habit formation by creating loops and link cues, triggers, and routines and actions and rewards. So when you repeat a behavior like checking your phone first thing in the morning, synaptic connections strengthen via a process called long-term potentiation, making the habit feel effortless and automatic. So basically, when you do something over and over again, there's less of a thought process behind it, and it becomes automated through the different rewards and the different benefits that you receive from engaging in that habit. Okay. Now, Changing habits involves neuroplasticity, which is the nervous system's ability to adapt by rewiring itself. So you can rewire yourself through neuroplasticity. And think of the brain literally molding as clay. The grooves that you see in the brain, when you look at the brain, you always see those different grooves on the surface. Neuroplasticity in the physical form is the changing of those grooves and the connections, but internally you're seeing rewiring of electrical connections within the brain. And we all have neuroplasticity. Many of us don't utilize that potential within us, but neuroplasticity is essential to changing habits. Okay, so when you're changing your habits, this means weakening old pathways through avoidance or substitution and building new ones by consistently practicing a replacement behavior. For example, if you're trying to replace procrastination with productivity, the nervous system must form new associations, often requiring conscious effort from the prefrontal cortex to override autopilot mode of the basal ganglia, which is that region in the brain involved in habit formation. Over time, this shifts the balance, but it starts as a deliberate neurological battle between the old and the new circuits. So when it comes to changing the habits, let's keep in mind it is a deliberate battle between old and new circuits or pathways of wiring within the brain. And this battle, when you are successful in the new circuits being reinforced, is what changes the brain through neuroplasticity and physically changes those grooves that you see in the brain. Okay. Now, one thing to know about the nervous system is it's a lot slower in changing than our logical thought process, which is very interesting to me when I learned about it. So you can make a decision that, hey, I'm going to make these changes about myself, or this thing is wrong, or whatever conclusion you can come to that dictates that there's time for a change, and you can see that logically, right? And you can rationalize that to yourself. The nervous system takes longer to adjust, even if your brain or your logical side of your brain has already made the decision, right? And this is why it is very difficult for people to make changes that are long lasting when it comes to their habits or other decisions that they make, because they don't account for this, right? So the nervous system changes are gradual because of neuroplasticity. While powerful, it is not instantaneous. It relies on biological processes like protein synthesis for new synaptic connections, axonal growth for rewiring, and myelin sheath thickening to speed up signal transmission, all of which require repeated stimulation over days, weeks, or even months, right? So old habits have deeply entrenched pathways reinforced by years of repetition. So dismantling them involves synaptic pruning, weakening unused connections, and habituation to form new ones, right? So you can see through that explanation, right? You're basically rebuilding and destroying old pathways within your nervous system, which is why, unlike our rational thought processes and our ability to use reason, the nervous system does not go through those same channels to change. And that's why it's a lot slower. It's because there is a change going on physiologically in the body, where things are being stripped away from lack of use and new things are being put together. And that is not an instantaneous process, because it is a physiological one occurring in our body, right? So some factors that affect our ability to make these nervous system changes are age, stress, sleep, and something to note is that younger brains are oftentimes capable of greater neuroplasticity, but that does not mean that just because you're older that you're lacking. We all have a certain amount of neuroplasticity in our brain, and it is our responsibility to utilize that to its maximum potential. Some things that can hold back our ability to utilize neuroplasticity include our chronic stress, right? It can hinder our ability to adapt by elevating the stress hormone known as cortisol, which impairs the function of the hippocampus. On average, it takes about 18 to 254 days for a new habit to become automatic, depending on the complexity and consistency, of course, as the brain needs more time to consolidate changes during sleep processes like memory replay. Okay, so let's talk about some real world examples next about how the nervous system changes, but slowly, right? Gradual rewiring, why habits changes feel challenging but become sustainable with persistence. And here are some relatable examples. Okay. Learning a new language, right? Initially, speaking feels awkward because the brain lacks efficient pathways for vocabulary and grammar, but consistent practice, daily lessons, stimulates the neuroplasticity in areas like the Broca area in the brain, which is responsible for language production. Over months, fluency emerges as neural circuits strengthen. Think about someone starting Duolingo, for example. Early frustration gives way to automatic recall, but quitting early leaves weak connections intact, right? So quitting a bad habit like overeating junk food, guilty. The nervous system's reward system, driven by dopamine releases in the nucleus accumbens, is wired to crave sugary treats from repeated indulgence. Changing to healthier eating requires time to recondition these pathways, perhaps 4 to 6 weeks of mindful choices during which cravings persist. A real world case, someone dieting might slip up initially due to stress triggering old habits, but persistence rewires the system, making salads, for example, more appealing then new associations form. I laugh because I am not a fan of salads, you guys. Those of you who know me know that I get my fruits and vegetables through a smoothie, and salads is probably not high on my list. But it looks like through this example that I could train myself to maybe appreciate salads a little bit more. Building an exercise routine, which I relate with a lot more. Sedentary lifestyles create neural inertia where the brain associates movement with effort rather than reward. Starting a gym habit engages the motor cortex and rewards the center slowly. It may take about 21 to 66 days, for example, for it to feel natural, right? But for audiences like office workers, this mirrors transitioning from couch sitting to daily walks. Early soreness and motivation dips reflect the nervous system's adjustment period, but eventually endorphin releases make it habitual and reduces risks like heart disease, right? Through the cardiovascular exercise that is a benefit of being involved in a exercise routine. Another real world example that we can relate to involves overcoming social anxiety. Habitual avoidance of social situations strengthens the fear circuits in the amygdala, right? Therapy like exposure gradually desensitizes these via plasticity in the prefrontal cortex, but it can take months. In terms of someone who is shy at parties, they may need repeated small interactions to rewire responses, turning dread into confidence, similar to public speakers who need practice until the stage fright fades. In all cases, patience is key. Rushing leads to burnout, and while steady effort leverages the nervous system's adaptability for lasting change, right? So for those of you looking to make changes in your habits, and that's not the focal point here of this podcast, but for those of you looking to make changes in your habits, understand that a steady flow is going to be what needs to happen in order to allow that space for the nervous system to adjust with your rational or logical mind, which already knows why it needs to make this change. All right. So let's talk about the different regulatory mechanisms of the nervous system, right? Now, you have two different regulatory mechanisms involved in the nervous system. And now we're getting into the meat of the podcast here, because this is a very, very important topic that people just don't simply understand here. The internal regulation of the nervous system is one way to regulate your nervous system. And another way to regulate your nervous system is through external regulation. Okay. The nervous system, particularly the autonomic branch, which controls involuntary functions like heart rate, digestion, stress responses, can be regulated through internal or external means. Regulation here means maintaining the balance between the sympathetic or the fight or flight or the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest state, preventing chronic dysregulation and leading to issues that chronic dysregulation will lead to issues like anxiety, burnout, or physical illness. All right. So it's very important that we regulate our nervous system so that way we don't have chronic issues. Okay. Now, internal regulation, what is that? Let's talk about that. This involves self-directed techniques that an individual can use to influence their own nervous system without relying on outside interventions, right? So examples that you guys can all resonate with involve deep breathing, right? Mindfulness meditation, yoga, progressive muscle relaxation, and biofeedback training. These methods activate the vagus nerve and promote the parasympathetic dominance, fostering a sense of calm and resilience from within. Internal regulation builds on neuroplasticity, rewiring neural pathways over time to make balanced states more automatic. Now, external regulation, this relies on outside factors to modulate the nervous system, which can include pharmacological interventions, right? AKA medications, or environmental adjustments, right? Changing the environment of your room, or social co-regulation, seeking comfort from a trusted person to mirror calm states, or therapeutic tools, transcranial magnetic stimulation, other therapies like that. While effective, these external regulatory methods can be effective for immediate relief. External methods often act as temporary supports, influencing the nervous system through external stimuli rather than building intrinsic control. And that's a key statement right there that I want to pause real quick and talk a little bit more about. External regulatory methods for your nervous system can help, kind of like a band-aid, if you will. When you use them chronically, you take away the ability for you to have that control over your internal nervous system. And that's what is the most important to creating a stable, healthy human being in terms of regulating their emotions and their nervous system state. So use your external regulation when needed, but understand it's temporary, and do not place your main source of regulation on something external. Make sure you cultivate the ability to regulate your nervous system intrinsically. That is absolutely important. I cannot stress this enough. There are people out there, and if this resonates with you, I challenge you to think about this, who place their regulation of their nervous system on something external. And you can often see this, people placing this external regulatory mechanism in another person outside of them, functioning as the external regulatory method for their nervous system. And it is ultimately not a way to bring that consistency in your life, and also it is ultimately not in your best interest. Again, external regulatory methods for your nervous system should act as a temporary buffer, but not as your main buffer. And that is what I'm cautioning against here in today's podcast. Okay, the key difference between internal regulation and external regulation involves the differences in agency and sustainability. Internal regulation empowers self-mastery and long-term adaptability, while external regulation provides quick fixes but can foster dependency if overused. For instance, internal methods enhance endogenous neurotransmitter balance, like increasing serotonin through meditation, whereas external ones introduce or mimic these chemicals artificially, right? So essentially, external regulatory measures are not as authentic as something intrinsic, okay? Although they have its uses, right? Think of tools in the toolbox, have those available. Understand that the purest and strongest form of regulation for your nervous system has to come from within. Okay, so why is internal regulation more valuable? Well, let's talk about that. Internal regulation holds long term value because it cultivates autonomy, resilience, and holistic well being. It reduces reliance on external variables that may not always be available and sustainable, and that is the key difference. One of the key differences right there is that the external regulatory tools, if you become reliant on them, may not always be there. And when that happens, you are going to be basically in a terrible circumstance if you have not mastered the ability to regulate your nervous system internally, right? Okay. Unlike external methods, which can have side effects, medication tolerance, if you're using that, or withdrawal, if you're talking about people, internal techniques are cost-free, portable, and adaptable to any situation, whether you're alone in traffic or facing a crisis, right? Research in neuroscience shows that consistent internal practices strengthen the prefrontal cortex's inhibitory control over the amygdala, which is the fear center, leading to better emotional regulation and decision making under stress, right? So, moreover, internal regulation promotes empowerment. It shifts the individuals from a reactive or victim mindset to a proactive one, fostering a sense of control that external aids might undermine by implying inherent inadequacy. In evolutionary terms, humans are wired for self-regulation as a survival skill, and prioritizing it aligns with our natural physiological processes. While external regulation is crucial in acute scenarios like severe trauma or overdependence, while external regulation is crucial for acute scenarios, overdependence can hinder personal growth, whereas internal mastery builds a foundation that integrates and enhances external support when needed. Ultimately, its value lies in sustainability. Internal skills compound over time, creating a virtuous cycle of improved nervous system health that external methods alone just simply cannot regulate. Okay, let's talk about how mastering the internal nervous system can help you physically, spiritually, and psychologically. Mastering internal regulation of the nervous system, that is, transforms the nervous system into a reliable ally, yielding profound benefits across multiple dimensions of life. By consistently practicing these techniques, such as breathwork, meditation, you rewire the neural circuits for baseline calm, which cascades into tangible improvements. Physically, internal regulation optimizes bodily function by balancing the autonomic nervous system, reducing chronic inflammation and stress-related wear. For example, it lowers cortisol levels, which in turn improves immune function, blood pressure, and sleep quality, and potentially adds years to your life expectancy. Athletes use it to enhance performance through better heart rate variability, while those in chronic pain find relief as regulated states dampen pain signals in the spinal cord. Real-world applications include managing conditions like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, hypertension, without sole reliance on medications. Studies show that mindfulness-based practices can decrease heart disease risk by 30 to 40% through sustained parasympathetic, which is your relaxed nervous system state activation, right? So those are the physical benefits of utilizing your internal regulatory nervous system tools to maintain your body versus relying on external factors, which I've seen this in a personal note a lot. Psychologically, let's talk about those benefits. Mastery builds emotional intelligence and mental fortitude by strengthening neural pathways for self-soothing and cognitive flexibility. It helps break the cycle of anxiety and depression by interrupting rumination with loops in the default mode network. Rumination, for those of you who don't know, is when you're thinking about something negative over and over and over again without resolution, right? So by mastering the internal regulatory nervous system tools at your disposal, you can end rumination loops, right, in the default mode network, leading to greater self-esteem and reduce reactivity to triggers. Psychologically, this translates to better relationships as you are less likely to project unregulated stress onto others and enhance problem solving with the prefrontal cortex operating at peak efficiency. In therapy contexts, this like CBT or DBT, internal regulation amplifies outcomes by providing tools for lifelong mental health maintenance and empowers individuals to navigate trauma or adversity with resilience rather than avoidance. So psychologically, right, we can see all the benefits there of what it comes down to related to regulating your own nervous system through an internal methodology. So in essence, what I want you to take from the psychological benefit is that it's going to help your relationships and it's going to help your own emotional intelligence, right? And it's going to give you the ability to self-soothe. It's going to give you cognitive flexibility and ultimately give you the tools to manage your mental health at a greater capacity that is simply not possible of achieving when you're relying on external regulatory methods. Now, spiritually, what are the benefits spiritually of regulating your internal nervous system? Well, on a deeper level, internal regulation fosters a connection to one's inner self, often described in spiritual traditions as aligning with the source or achieving enlightenment. Techniques like meditation, quiet, a mind that can often be chaotic, allowing access to transcendent states where ego dissolves. It promotes feelings of unity, purpose, and awe. This mastery can enhance practices like prayer or contemplation, as a regulated nervous system reduces distractions from fight or flight impulses, enabling profound insights or mystical experiences even. For many, it cultivates compassion and presence, aligning with spiritual growth and transforming reactive habits into mindful responses, ultimately leading to a sense of inner peace that is independent of external circumstances. So, what I want you guys to take from this is that you and all of us need to focus on managing our internal nervous system ourselves. And we need to understand that it takes time to change that nervous system. Wherever your starting point is, it takes time to change that nervous system. You may logically want to make a change, but physiologically, it's going to take some time. But by mastering the tools, the methods that allow you to manage your nervous system from an internal place, you can always be there for yourself in ways that when you use external factors, medications, or I use this example heavily, other people to regulate your nervous system, is just not going to be readily available at any time. You will always be readily available at any time, no matter what the circumstance is. If it derives from internal, you will be there. So it will be far more advantageous for you to look into mastering your own internal nervous system regulation. And then, after you do that, use some external regulatory factors from time to time, but it won't be from a place of necessity, because when it is from a place of necessity, there will be some negative outcomes simply due to the fact of lack of adaptability and lack of availability, right? And those individuals out there who do use external regulatory factors, such as other people, for their own calmness and their own regulation, it often develops into some really unhealthy relational dynamics and can evolve spiral into some really, really tragic circumstances. So keep that in mind, that your internal regulation of your nervous system is a journey that we all must traverse and achieve mastery in. Thank you so much for those of you who took the time to listen to this point and get to this point in Knowledge for the Soul. I do want to do a shout out to a good friend of mine by the name of Krishan, who has designed this logo here, which looks very nice. I really appreciate you. And I will see you guys soon, definitely sooner than later, for the next episode of Knowledge for the Soul, while I bring to the forefront another topic that could benefit the health of us all. Thank you, and Merry Christmas to all of you guys who celebrate. Happy holidays to those of you who celebrate. Enjoy your time with your family. Enjoy your time with your loved ones. Make the most of it. And remember, when you're around all those relatives, that it is your responsibility to regulate your internal nervous system. Thank you.